The museum smelled of polished wood and fresh paint. Posters with the title The Brothers' Story, A Promise Across Generations hung outside the entrance. For Yvonne, the sight made his stomach twist with both nerves and pride. Inside, glass cases displayed the letters, carefully flattened and mounted. The dog tag rested on a velvet cushion, the wartime notebook open to a page where Misha's words and Pavel's handwriting stood side by side. A large photograph of the two young soldiers hung on the wall, their arms around each other, their eyes bright with youth. People began to arrive, students, families, veterans with rows of medals on their jackets. The room filled with the hum of voices, the shuffle of footsteps. Yvonne walked with his grandmother and Andre, explaining each item to visitors. His words came easier than he expected. He told the story of the promise, the search, and the discovery of Sasha's letters. People listened, eyes wide, some wiping tears. Then, in the middle of the crowd, an old woman stepped forward. She leaned heavily on her cane, her hair white, her face wrinkled, but her eyes sharp. She pointed to Sasha's portrait on the wall. "I knew her," she said. The room hushed. "She was my teacher, Alexandra Shamayanova. I was one of the children she scolded for running in the corridor. She gave me my love for numbers. And once she told me about her brother. She said, I had a brother who never came home, but I carry him with me every day." Ivan's chest tightened. "Do you remember her talking about her family?" The woman nodded slowly. "She always spoke of promises. She said her brother's friend had promised to look after her. She never explained, but she said it gave her strength." Her gaze moved to Ivan's grandmother. "You must be that friend's family." Tears welled in the old woman's eyes. "Then the promise was not wasted. You kept it. You're here." The visitors murmured softly, the weight of history pressing on all of them. For Yvonne, it felt like a door opening, a voice from the past confirming that everything they had done mattered. As the crowd moved on, Andre leaned close to Yvonne. "See, even strangers carry pieces of the story. We just had to bring them together." Yvonne nodded, his heart full. For the first time, he felt not just like a boy telling a tale, but like a guardian of something far greater, a bridge between lives, between generations. Within a week, the exhibition became the talk of the city. Local newspapers printed photographs of the display cases with headlines like "Letters Across Time" and "A Promise Kept for 80 Years." Teachers brought entire classes to the museum. Veterans arrived in groups, leaning on canes, their eyes misting as they read the faded ink. One afternoon, a journalist from a regional television channel called. She wanted to film a short segment for Victory Day. "It's not just a war story," she explained to Andre. "It's a family story. People need to see how promises outlast even death." On the day of filming, Yvonne was nervous. He wore his best shirt, but his palms were sweaty. The camera crew set up lights around the glass cases. The journalist crouched to Yvonne's level and asked gently, "Why do you think this story matters?" Yvonne swallowed hard. His grandmother's hand pressed reassuringly against his back. "Because," he said slowly, "my grandfather and Andrei's grandfather weren't just soldiers. They were friends. They promised to look after each other's families. And even though one of them died, the promise still lives. We are proof of that." The journalist's eyes softened. "Beautifully said." The segment aired that evening. Yvonne watched on the living room sofa, his heart pounding as he saw his own nervous face on the screen. The camera lingered on the dog tag, on Sasha's letters, on the photograph of the two young men. Afterward, the phone began to ring. Neighbors, distant relatives, even strangers called to say how moved they were. One Veterans Association asked if the exhibition could travel to other towns. For Andre, it was overwhelming. He sat at his cluttered desk late at night, shaking his head. "All my life, I thought this story was ours alone. Now it belongs to thousands." Ivan's grandmother smiled gently. "That is what happens when truth is carried. It no longer weighs one pair of shoulders. It rests on many." But amid the praise came something unexpected. A letter arrived at the museum, unsigned, written in shaky handwriting. "I was there. I knew Misha Kirov. If you wish to hear the truth of that night, meet me. I cannot carry it much longer." The address was scribbled below. Yvonne's hands trembled as he held it. Someone who knew him. Still alive. Andre exhaled slowly. "Then our search is not over yet." The address led them to a modest apartment block on the edge of the city, its walls faded, its courtyard filled with laundry lines and children's bicycles. Ivan clutched the mysterious letter in his pocket, his heartbeat loud in his ears. Andrei pressed the buzzer. After a pause, the door clicked open. They climbed 3 flights of creaking stairs and knocked on the door marked 37. It opened slowly. An old man stood there, stooped but tall, his face lined like worn leather. His eyes, though clouded with age, were piercing. He leaned heavily on a wooden cane. "You came," he said, his voice low and raspy. "Come in." The apartment smelled of tobacco and old wood. Photographs of soldiers hung on the walls, alongside medals in dusty frames. The man gestured for them to sit at a small table. "I am Captain Sergei Ivanovich Orlov," he began. "Retired now, of course, but in 1943, I was a lieutenant. And I was there the night Mikhail Kirov vanished." Ivan leaned forward, barely breathing. "Please tell us." Orlov's gaze grew distant, his voice heavy with memory. "It was January, the river half frozen, the ice breaking beneath us. We were ordered to cross under fire. Searchlights cut the night, bullets whipped the air. Men screamed. The water swallowed many." He paused, gripping his cane as though to steady himself. "I saw your grandfather Pavel," he said, looking at Ivan's grandmother. "He had fallen into the river and Kirov was pulling him out. He could have saved himself, but he went back for Pavel. Twice. The second time, a shell burst near the bank. When the smoke cleared, Pavel was alive. Mikhail was gone." Ivan's grandmother covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Andrei's hands clenched into fists, his jaw trembling. Orlov continued, his voice breaking. "For years, I carried the guilt. I lived, while he didn't. I told myself it was fate, but I never forgot his face. He laughed, even then. He laughed at death itself. That is how I remember him." Silence filled the room, heavy and sacred. Finally, Orlov reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, rusted object, a harmonica, dented and worn. "This was his. He used to play when we rested. Simple tunes, but they gave us strength. I kept it all these years, but it belongs to you now." He placed it in Andrei's hands. The metal was cold, the weight immense. Andrei's voice shook. "Thank you. You've given us back a piece of him." Orlov nodded, his eyes shining. "Tell his story. Make sure he is remembered not just for dying, but for how he lived. Brave, loyal, full of laughter." Ivan clutched the notebook tighter. The puzzle of Misha's life was no longer just fragments. It was a man, alive in memory, in music, in promises kept. As they left the apartment, the winter sun broke briefly through the clouds, casting light across the harmonica in Andrei's hand. Ivan whispered, "We found him. We found the last piece." The harmonica lay on the table between them, its metal dented, its reeds long silent. Ivan couldn't stop staring at it. It wasn't just an object, it was proof that Misha had lived, breathed, laughed. Proof that his story wasn't just lines in a notebook. Andrei turned it over carefully, as if it might crumble in his hands. "He touched this," he whispered. His breath made it sing. Ivan's grandmother, her eyes still swollen from tears, nodded. "Your grandfather used to hum at night. I think it was these tunes. He never told me where they came from." They sat in silence, the weight of memory pressing down like a mantle. Then Ivan leaned forward. "We have to add it to the exhibition. Not just the letters, not just the notebook. This. People need to see it." Andrei hesitated. "But what if it gets lost? Stolen?" "It won't," his grandmother said firmly. "The museum will guard it. And besides, objects are meant to carry memory, not hide in drawers." At the museum, the curator gasped softly when she saw the harmonica. "It's perfect," she said. "It will be the heart of the exhibition." She placed it in a glass case with a small plaque, "Harmonica of Private Mikhail S. Kirov 19-319 for 3 carried at the front. Preserved by a comrade. Donated by his family in 2023." When the exhibition reopened with the new edition, visitors gathered around the case. Some leaned close, their breath fogging the glass. Others simply stood in silence, as if listening for a faint tune that might still linger in the metal. Ivan watched them, his chest swelling with pride. He whispered to Andrei, "It's like Hayes playing again. For everyone." Andrei's throat worked, but he nodded. "For everyone." That evening, they held a small gathering at the museum. Veterans spoke, students recited poems, and finally, a young musician lifted the harmonica carefully from its case. It had been cleaned, restored enough to produce sound. The first notes were shaky, fragile, Then a melody emerged, simple, haunting, but alive. The audience held its breath. Ivan closed his eyes, imagining Misha sitting by a campfire, grinning as he played the same tune for tired soldiers. When the last note faded, the room erupted in applause. For Ivan, it was more than music. It was the past singing to the present, the promise echoing across time. The exhibition was meant to last 2 weeks. But by the end of the first, the museum could hardly handle the crowds. School groups filled the halls, veterans lingered for hours, young couples came holding hands, whispering as they read the letters. Newspapers across Russia began to print articles. One headline read, "A soldier's promise that never died." Another, "The harmonica that survived the war." Soon, the Ministry of Culture contacted the museum. "We want this exhibition to travel," the curator announced one morning, barely able to contain her excitement. Moscow, Street, Petersburg, Volgograd, even smaller towns. People everywhere need to see this. Ivan's heart raced. He looked at his grandmother, who gave a faint smile. Your grandfather never left the front, but now his story will travel farther than he ever dreamed. The first stop was Moscow. A grand hall in the city center displayed the letters, the notebook, the photograph, and, at its heart, the harmonica. Ivan stood beside Andrei as television cameras filmed the opening. Reporters swarmed, asking questions. "What do you want people to feel when they see this?" one asked. Ivan swallowed, then said firmly, "That promises matter, that friendship matters, that even in war, there was love strong enough to last for generations." The reporter's eyes softened. Spoken like someone twice your age. In each city, the reaction was the same. In Street, Petersburg, a group of students stood in silence before the letters, then left flowers at the base of the display. In Volgograd, veterans saluted the harmonica as though Misha himself stood before them. In small towns, old men and women whispered, "This could have been my brother, my husband, my son." Andrei, usually reserved, found himself speaking more openly each time. "For me," he told one audience, "this is not just history. It is family. A grandfather I never knew, but whose laughter I can still hear through these words, these objects." Ivan's grandmother traveled with them, her steps slow but steady. She watched as strangers wept over the notebook, as children asked questions about Sasha's letters. One evening, she told Ivan quietly, "This is what your dedushka wanted. Not medals, not statues, just to be remembered as a man who kept a promise." By the time they returned home, the exhibition had become more than a project. It was a movement, a living memory carried from city to city. It happened in Volgograd. The exhibition hall was crowded, voices echoing under the high ceilings. Ivan was standing near the harmonica's glass case, explaining its story to a group of students, when he noticed a man watching from a distance. The man was in his 60s, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair combed neatly back. His suit was simple but worn, and his eyes, sharp grey, were fixed on the photograph of Misha and Pavel. He stood there for a long time, unmoving, as if the image had pinned him in place. Finally, he approached. His voice, when he spoke, was low but steady. "That's Mikhail Kirov." Ivan blinked. "Yes," he said cautiously. "Do you know the story?" The man's gaze shifted to him. "I know more than the story. He was my uncle." The words hit like thunder. Ivan's grandmother, who had been nearby, gasped and clutched the back of a chair. Andrei stepped forward quickly. "Your uncle? Then who are you?" "My name is Victor," the man said. "My father was Mikhail's younger brother, Pyotr. He was too young for the front, but he remembered Misha all his life. He told me stories, fragments. I thought they were only family legends." He gestured toward the harmonica. "Until I saw this." Andrei's face drained of color. "You mean there's another branch of the Kirovs?" "Yes," Victor said. "I have children, grandchildren. We live here in Volgograd. We always wondered if Misha's line survived, but no one knew." It was like shouting into the wind. Tears pricked Ivan's eyes. All these years, two families had been living parallel lives, unaware of each other. Now, in this hall filled with strangers, they had finally crossed. That evening, they sat together in a quiet cafe. Victor unfolded a faded photograph from his wallet. 3 boys in a courtyard, one of them identified on the back as Pyotr Kirov, 1937. "My father kept this," Victor said. "He said his brother Misha was always the one protecting him. Even when they quarreled, He would throw himself between Pieta and anyone else. Like a shield, my father said. Ivan glanced at the portrait of Misha in his notebook, and for the first time, he could imagine him not just as a soldier, but as a brother, a son, a boy in a courtyard. Andrei's voice trembled. We thought the family ended with Sasha, but you're proof it didn't. Victor smiled faintly. And you're proof that promises outlive even bloodlines. They clinked glasses of tea, the 3 generations bound by a story larger than any of them. It was Andrei who suggested it. We keep meeting in museums, cafes, and train stations, he said. But promises are not kept in public halls. They are kept at a table with bread and tea. Let's sit together, all of us. So one Saturday, Victor invited them to his home in Volgograd. The apartment was modest, filled with bookshelves and the smell of fried onions. On the wall hung family photos, children in school uniforms, grandchildren with gap-toothed smiles, black and white portraits of ancestors long gone. The table groaned under the weight of dishes, steaming borscht, pickled cucumbers, rye bread, roasted chicken. Ivan's grandmother settled into a chair at the head, her shawl around her shoulders, eyes shining. Andrei sat beside Victor, their resemblance uncanny now that they were close, the same squared jaw, the same crease between the brows when they concentrated. Ivan sat across from them, notebook ready. He wanted to capture every detail, every word. They began with silence, heads bowed. Then Victor raised his glass. To those who came before us. To Mikhail, to Sasha, to Pavel. They are not gone tonight. They are here. Glasses clinked, and the meal began. At first, the conversation was cautious, talk of weather, of travel, of school exams. But soon stories began to flow. My father always said Misha could fix anything, Victor shared. Once he mended a broken chair with nothing but twine and nails. Then he sat on it proudly and fell straight to the floor. Andrei laughed, surprising even himself. Sasha wrote that he once tried to straighten a fuse wire with breadcrumbs. She said he always thought the world could be fixed with jokes. Ivan grinned. Grandma told me he smuggled a cat into the barracks. The table erupted in laughter, voices overlapping, memories weaving together like threads of a tapestry. At one point, Ivan noticed his grandmother watching quietly, tears in her eyes. Are you all right, babushka? He asked. She nodded. For years, I thought your dedushka carried the promise alone. But now I see we were never alone. The family was always larger than we knew. Andrei raised his glass again. To promises not broken, not forgotten, but fulfilled. This time, when the glasses clinked, the sound felt like the closing of a circle. Strong and whole, Moscow prepared for the holiday with flags and garlands strung across the streets. The air already humming with rehearsals for the military parade. For Ivan, this year felt different. Victory Day had always meant fireworks and songs on television, but now it carried weight, names, faces. The museum invited them to bring the Brothers' Story exhibition to the capital for the celebrations. The display was set up in a grand hall near Red Square, where visitors from all over the country would come. On May 9th, Ivan walked through the crowded city with his grandmother on one side and Andrei on the other. Victor had traveled too, bringing his children and grandchildren. For the first time, all the scattered branches of the family were together in one place. Inside the hall, the letters and photographs shone under bright lights. The harmonica rested in its case, polished until it gleamed. Veterans paused before it, saluting quietly. Children pressed their noses to the glass. Ivan stood proudly, answering questions from strangers. Yes, these were their real words. Yes, the promise was kept. When the mayor arrived, surrounded by cameras, he shook Andrei's hand and said, "This exhibition is a gift to the city. You have reminded us that history is not only battles, it is loyalty, friendship, family." Later, as the evening sun set, the families gathered on a balcony overlooking the parade. Tanks rumbled below, planes roared overhead, but Ivan's attention was fixed on the small group around him. His mother, his grandmother, Andrei, Victor, and their children. His grandmother whispered, almost to herself, "Pavel, Misha, you see, your children stand here together. Your promise is alive." Ivan felt a lump in his throat. He pulled the photograph from his pocket, the one he had found months ago, the seed of everything. He held it up to the sky, where fireworks had just begun to bloom. "Happy Victory Day," he whispered. The crackle of color lit the faces of his family, and for a moment Yvonne was certain the two young men in the photograph were smiling with them. The week after Victory Day felt quieter, as if the whole city were exhaling after holding its breath. For Yvonne, the silence was filled not with emptiness, but with possibility. Everywhere he turned, people spoke of the brothers' story. Newspapers quoted his words, schools invited him to retell the promise, veterans asked for copies of the letters. One evening, gathered again at Andrei's apartment, the families sat around the table, papers and teacups scattered between them. Victor unfolded the latest newspaper. On the front page was a photograph of the exhibition with the headline, "The Promise That United Generations." Andrei set the paper down. "We can't stop here. Exhibitions end. Newspaper articles fade. But the story deserves something permanent." Yvonne's mother nodded. "What are you suggesting?" "A book," Andrei said simply. "Not an academic history, a living one. The letters, the notebook, the harmonica, the memories. Yvonne's words, too. We put it all together. A memorial not of stone, but of paper. One that people can carry home." Yvonne's eyes lit up. "I could help write it. I could tell the story the way it happened, from the photograph to Kozon to you." His grandmother smiled softly. "Your dedushka would be proud." He believed words could build bridges stronger than steel. Victor leaned forward. "I'll add my father's memories. Stories of Misha as a boy. The way he chased pigeons, the way he protected me. People should know he wasn't only a soldier." The plan took shape quickly. Each person would contribute. Andrei would organize the letters, Yvonne would write the narrative, Victor would provide family lore, and his grandmother would give Pavel's side of the story. They decided to call the book "To Brothers, One Promise." For weeks, they worked late into the night. Yvonne filled his notebook with drafts, pouring out his thoughts. He described the rain-soaked day he had found the photograph, the dusty smell of the Kozon school's basement, the trembling moment when Andrei opened Sasha's letter. Sometimes he doubted himself. What if I'm not good enough? What if no one cares? He asked one night. Andrei placed a hand on his shoulder. "Yvonne, you're already doing what no historian could. You're writing with your heart. That's why they will care." His grandmother added gently, "You are not only writing their story, you are writing ours." By the end of summer, the manuscript was finished. The cover bore the photograph of Misha and Pavel, young and smiling, arms slung around each other. Below it, in bold letters, "To Brothers, One Promise." When Yvonne held the first printed copy in his hands, his chest swelled with something he had no name for: pride, love, belonging. He opened to the first page, where the dedication read, "Autumn settled over the city with the smell of wet leaves and smoke in the air." Yvonne walked through the park clutching a copy of the book, its cover smooth beneath his fingers. The first print run had sold out in days. Libraries requested copies, schools added it to their reading lists. At the museum, children pressed their hands against the glass case that held the harmonica. Teachers guided them from letter to letter, telling them about promises, about friendship. Yvonne sometimes stood quietly among them, listening. He loved the way the children's eyes widened when they heard Misha's jokes, or the way they whispered Sasha's name as though she was still alive. One afternoon, he visited the cemetery with his grandmother. They placed the book gently against Pavel's grave, next to fresh flowers. His grandmother traced the carved letters of her husband's name, whispering, "Pavel, it is done. Your promise is whole." Yvonne knelt beside her. For the first time, he didn't feel the weight of a mystery pressing him forward. Instead, he felt peace. Weeks later, at a small bookshop, Yvonne saw something that made his chest tighten with joy. A stranger stood at the counter, buying "To Brothers, One Promise." The man leafed through it, pausing on the photograph of Misha and Pavel, then nodded to himself as if greeting old friends. Yvonne realized then that the story no longer belonged only to him, or to Andrei, or even to their families. It belonged to everyone willing to carry it forward. As he stepped back into the crisp autumn air, he looked up at the grey sky, imagining two young men standing shoulder to shoulder, laughing as they had in that long-ago photograph. "Thank you," he whispered. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment, it sounded almost like a harmonica's tune, faint but unbroken, for all who kept their promises, and for those who remember. And Yvonne, once just a boy holding a photograph, now felt like a messenger entrusted with voices that refused to fade.